So now that we've got some images to work with for our video project, I'm going to show you a couple of things in terms of how you can process them using Photoshop. There's many more things you could do with Photoshop, obviously, but these are the basics. So here's an image. If you remember, I had Hello Kitty 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is Hello Kitty 1. Now you can see that we've got a lot of really not very interesting information up here in this part of the photo. You can also see, if you look at the image size, that it's 1024 wide by 768 high. And if you remember, the magic number we need to get at is, anybody remember? All right, the magic number is 720 by 534. So what that means is we've got roughly 200 pixels of height that we could crop off of there, and roughly 300 pixels of width. So that's good. That's why it's always good to have images that are larger in terms of pixels to start with. It gives you more options in terms of the cropping. So we're going to crop this. And if you look at the ruler, I've got my ruler set in pixels, which is what I suggest you do, so that you can see exactly what you're getting. And if you notice here, we've got almost 200 pixels of space here, meaning we can cut that off and really focus in on this. Now, before we do that, a couple of quick image adjustments. Well, in fact, just one at this point. I usually use, for quick adjustment, levels. And you're probably familiar with this. You get a histogram. They're sort of, cheap way to do things, which is to click auto. And any true photographer would argue that that's not a good way to go. But I can tell you, if you've got a lot of images to process, auto is going to give you a decent quality about 8 out of 10 times. Now, as I look at what it did here, I actually am not that crazy about what it did, and I would probably go back and adjust it manually, which hopefully you learned in your digital imaging class. But for the sake of moving on with this tutorial, I'm just going to accept it as it is. It's really darker than what I'd like. But like I said, probably about 80% of the time auto gives you a good result, and the other 20% of the time you're going to have to go in and tweak it. But for now, I'm just going to take this as it is because I want to focus on the cropping idea. Now, you can use the crop tool. And when you click on it, you notice you've got options up here that you can actually set what you want. So we know that we want this to be 720 by 534. Now be sure that if you notice when I hit tab over there, this went to pixels, and this one is going to go to pixels also. To be safe, you might want to just type the PX in there. It's following I believe what my ruler is set at. Since my ruler is set at pixels, this assumes I'm going to use pixels. I think that if your ruler is set at inches, it would assume inches. But you can fix that no matter what it's set at. If you type PX after the number, it's going to give you pixels. All right, now we've got the crop tool set for that. Now when I just click and drag, it's going to drag out a rectangle. It's the proper format, in other words, the proportion of width to height, and it's going to make it 720 pixels wide automatically, no matter what size I actually draw it to. So if I did this, pull it out all the way and hit enter, it's going to crop that to 720 pixels wide by 534. If I did this, let me move that over here, it's going to crop that and make it 720 pixels wide by 534 high. But since this whole image is only about 1,000 pixels wide, it's actually going to have to scale this up if I focus in on such a small area. If you want to get a sense, if you look up here at the ruler, notice right now that's only 200 pixels wide. There I've got about 750 pixels wide, so I can crop an area about this large and it's actually going to give me 720 pixels. I'm going to make it big enough to actually see Build-A-Bear Workshop. So what you don't want to do is pick a very tiny area like that, you can see that's about 150 pixels, because when I hit enter, it's going to actually scale that image up to 720 pixels wide. Not so good. So alright, let's go back here. Take that. Build a Bear Workshop. And now I'm going to hit the enter key, or return. It's 720 pixels wide by 534 because I had the crop tool set for that. Now, normally what I would do, it's probably going to look a little soft after that crop. I would probably go to Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask, and do a little bit of sharpening. And I've experimented with this a lot. 3 or 4 pixels, usually about 100%, gives you a little bit of sharpening without overkill. Might even be able to go a little higher with that. Okay, so that there you can see a little bit clearer image there. Alright, so there we are, and now I'm going to save this. You save as, and what I'm going to do is, I don't think you can see it on this particular window. Let me fix that. Okay, here we go. I'm going to save it as a JPEG because that's the format that iMovie actually is designed to work best with. So I'm going to save that, and I could save it as a copy, but in this case I'm going to put it in a different folder. I'm going to put it in the cropped folder, which leaves my original untouched in the originals folder. So that's going to keep the original, which is what we want to do, but also give me a cropped copy. So keep the number the same. It's the same image, Hello Kitty 1. I'm going to put it in the cropped folder, save it as a JPEG, hit save. And because JPEG compression is what's called lossy compression, in other words, when you save a JPEG file, you lose information. I'm going to save it at the largest possible, maximum quality, largest possible file, so it's going to do as little compression as possible. Alright, so that's your best bet, because when you make your movie and convert it to a QuickTime movie, it's going to compress it again. So every time you compress something, you lose quality. So let's start with the maximum quality we can get. Okay. Now I would do this for all of the images one by one and end up then with a whole batch of images that I can now put into my movie. So let's look now at worst case scenario. You've got an image that started off very small because you grabbed it off the web. So it's a really tiny image to start with. Let's look at this at the actual size. That doesn't look like actual size. Oh, I see. Okay, there's the actual size. So, very tiny image. If I were to use my crop tool and just take it over here and drag it, because the crop tool is set to be 720 pixels by 534, when I crop it, it's going to do what I asked, and in this case, in order to make it that size, it had to scale it up. And if you notice, this image is not so great. It's very pixelated, especially around the edges, and right here you can see these really bright areas. These are what's called compression artifacts. In other words, they're errors that are in there, not really good quality pixels from the image. So when you start with a small image, use the crop tool and hit OK, it simply makes that image as big as you want it at pretty low quality. So what can you do about that? If you have an image that's too small to start with, best way to enlarge it. This isn't great, but if you don't have any other options, go to Image, Image Size, and you can see very small image, 180. So we need it to be 720 pixels wide. And down here we're going to have to resample the image. not what you really ought to be doing, but in this case I have no choice. It's the only image I have to work with. And let's change the setting here to bicubic smoother, which is best for enlargement. Alright, so we click OK. And now you can see our Hello Kitty. And this one, it's not great, but it's better than when we just used the crop tool. So let me see if I can show you the difference here. Alright, here's the one done with the crop tool. You'll notice there's a lot of really fuzzy stuff happening here. There's some of these little bright areas that are starting to pop in. Really pretty pixelated looking. Here's the same thing done by enlarging it first and then cropping it to the proper width. Don't worry about the size differences, that's just a goof up in the crop. But if you notice this version, which we enlarged first, while it has some of that pixelation, it's a little bit smoother. It's not quite as extreme. This one here that we just used the crop tool, lots more pixelation happening around the edges. So if you have to start with a small image, abandon that crop tool method of doing it and use image size, enlarge, and be sure to choose bicubic smoother, best for enlargement. Alright, I think that about does the Photoshop portion of things. And again, same deal with this. Save as JPEG into the folder called cropped Hello Kitty 5 small. Save, and once again be sure that you're saving it at the maximum setting so that the smallest amount of compression is being used. Okay, when you do this with all your images, then you have a folder full of images that you can import into iMovie, and we'll talk about tutorials, and we'll do a demo in class on how to use iMovie.